Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen, and today I am here with a standalone review for the book Mona's Eyes by Thomas Schlesser, and this is translated from the French by Hildegarde Berle. Now, I don't do a whole lot of standalone book reviews on my channel that are for books outside of book prizes, but I decided to do this one because it's a book that has been really popular as of late, and it seems to be getting a lot of attention and buzz because it was recently named the Barnes Nobel Book of the Year. And also, I think because of that, I have had a couple people in my personal life ask me my thoughts about this book because it was something that they were thinking about picking up, but also they're considering giving it as a gift as well. So I figured, why not go ahead and have a conversation about it on my channel. So this is a heartwarming book that centers around the relationship between a young 10-year-old girl and her grandfather. At the beginning, our main character, her name is Mona, she experiences a temporary blindness that lasts for about an hour. Now, obviously, this is something that her parents are very concerned about, so they take her to the hospital, and the doctors are kind of baffled and really don't have a good explanation as to what had caused it. And they're still going to go through a bunch of tests and, try to figure out what the root cause of this was. But the doctor also suggests that because this was such a traumatic experience for Mona to go through, and there's also that looming thought that something might happen again that might be permanent and lead to a permanent blindness, the doctor thinks that it would be a good idea to also have Mona talk to a therapist about all of this stuff. Now, her grandfather volunteers to accompany her to these therapy visits, but instead of taking her there, he decides that this is going to be a great opportunity for him to take her to some of the great museums of Paris to teach her about art. Each week, the plan is that they are going to focus on a singular art piece, and they are going to talk about it and learn about it. This book is divided up into 52 different chapters, each of them focusing on a piece of art, and we learn about the art, the artist, and there is also a life lesson in there as well that he is eager to teach Mona. And there is also throughout the book a narrative about her home life as well, and how her parents are coping with this recent medical issue of hers, and also how they're coping with life in general. The family has had a lot of hardships. Her grandfather is a widow, and there's really not a whole lot of talk about Mona's grandmother, and as the story progresses, we learn more about her as well. As a whole, I did like this book, and I will talk about the reasons why, but I also think that there are some pretty big reasons why others might not get along with it, and things that might turn certain readers off. The glaring example that comes to mind for me is that I found this book to be incredibly wholesome and very sentimental, and the life lessons that Mona's grandfather was teaching her were very oversimplified, and they were even at times cliche. And personally, that is something that I didn't mind. Every once in a while, I do enjoy picking up a book that I don't have to think too hard about, and that's exactly what this book was. But I can also understand that if I had perhaps picked this up when I was in a different mood, I could have been a little bit annoyed by the oversimplicity of it, and also how kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of sugar-coated all of the life lessons were. But to be fair, in thinking about it, what I did come to the conclusion of is that we are talking about a 10-year-old girl here. So when the life lessons are being presented, it may need to have been done in a way that oversimplified it so that a 10-year-old could understand. Now, I will go into a little bit more detail about the fact that Mona is 10 and how the book also felt a little to adult a little later in the review, but I will swing back around to that. Another thing that might be quite off-putting about this book for certain readers is that if they are not a fan of art or do not enjoy learning about art, this is definitely not going to be an option for them. A good chunk of this book focuses on art history and the description, the detailed description of particular pieces of art, and we're also learning about the artist and their intent and purpose for creating the pieces. And for me, this was the part of the book that I personally enjoyed the most. The book started with visits to the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay, and this was by far, or these two sections by far, were my favorite part of the book. These two museums specifically have art that I tend to gravitate toward. For example, I really love the works of the Dutch Renaissance painters and the Italian Renaissance painters, as well as the Impressionists. And they also visited the Beaubourg, which started to lose me, and that was the third section. And it started to lose me because I'm just not a huge fan of modern or contemporary art. But if you are one that does enjoy that type of art, these could be chapters that you very much enjoy. I will be honest and say that 52 chapters that were seemingly doing the same thing over and over again with just swapping out a different art piece did become a bit of a slog, and the fact that I was not interested in about the last 15 or so chapters did make it feel like it was dragging a little bit. However, there were other events that were peppered throughout those chapters having to do with Mona's home life that were interesting, and that was enough to carry me through to the end. Now, even though I liked this book a lot, there were a few things about it that prevented me from loving it. First of all, I mentioned a little earlier that the life lessons that Mona was being taught were a little cliche, and they did seem like they were catered to a younger audience. However, Mona was a very bright and gifted child, and she felt very wise beyond her years, especially when talking about the art. She spoke very much like an adult, and her vocabulary felt very unrealistic to me. The way that she would talk about art, it almost felt like she was the expert and she was the one that was teaching us as opposed to her grandfather. She would often be looking at one piece of art and compare it to another one that she had previously learned a lesson about, and it just seemed very convenient, and it just didn't feel like an obvious enough thing for a 10-year-old to be able to make such astute observations and connections like that. Now, to be completely fair, I have never met a gifted French 10-year-old, so it may very much be a cultural thing. I just know that most of the 10-year-olds that I have ever met would never be able to speak so intelligently to art and make those connections and remember every single detail of a lesson they were taught, and also be able to pull from lessons that they have learned in the past to make those connections. So it did feel, like I said, unrealistic, but that is me being an American, and perhaps this is very much something that French children are extremely good at and taught at a very young age. There were so many times throughout this book that I was literally rolling my eyes at the words that Mona was using and the things that she was saying. Sometimes she spoke very childlike with a very immature and innocent vocabulary, and then the next thing you know, she's dropping these advanced vocab bombs, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. It just felt very unbalanced to me. I did have to eventually just let that go and go with the flow on it, and what I ultimately came to the conclusion of is that the author was just doing that to make the book feel more like something something an adult reader would want to continue with as opposed to it feeling YA. All of the adults in Mona's life did seem to treat her like an adult and talk to her as if she were one, so who knows, she could have been really advanced and I was just overreacting, but it was something, like I said, I would mention because it did get on my nerves just a little bit. I will also say that I was a little disappointed in the reveal about the cause of Mona's blindness. My issue with the vocabulary, felt very forced and convenient, and it added another layer of unbelievability to the story for me. And in all honesty, I think I would have enjoyed the book more if it had remained a mystery. Even though this book ended up being a like it instead of a love it, I did enjoy my time that I spent with this book. It was an interactive reading experience for me, and I ended up learning a lot, and I was introduced to many pieces of art that I was unfamiliar with. It also got bonus points because it actually highlighted one of my favorite paintings of all time, and I feel like it's a lesser known piece, and I was really surprised and happy to see it. In case you're curious, it's by a German painter named Caspar David Friedrich, and it's a painting called The Tree of Crows, and I absolutely love it, and I was so excited to see it in here because I was able to learn more about the painting itself, but also about the artist. Now, another thing I did enjoy about this book, and unfortunately this wasn't something that I was able to experience because I had checked this book out of the library, but if you have a physical copy and you're able to remove the dust jacket, on the other side of it there is a list and a visual of all of the different art pieces that are talked about in each of the chapters. Since I didn't have a copy where I could remove the dust jacket, I was able to find a website that had a list of all of the paintings that were talked about, and I was able to search them on my own and spend a little time looking at them and observing them prior to reading the chapter, and doing that made the book feel very interactive. And it was great because I was going into those chapters and I had a visual in my head of what it looked like, and there were times when they would make a point about a piece of art and I would stop and I would look to see exactly what they were seeing, and it really helped me to immerse myself in not only the art but also the story. This part of the reading experience was a lot of fun, and it made me appreciate more what the author was trying to do with the book. And in case you're interested, I will also link the website that I used to get all of that information in the description of this video. So that's it. Those are my thoughts on Mona's Eyes. Thank you so much for watching, and I would love to hear your thoughts about this book if it is one that you have already read. And until we read again, bye!